Have you ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere? Like your very appearance marked you as an outsider no matter where you went? That was Sage Chin's reality every single day in Koreatown, Los Angeles, where her startlingly blue eyes made her a curiosity at best and a target at worst. The elementary school hallway stretched endlessly before her as she carried yet another box of her personal belongings toward the exit. 26 years old and getting fired from her third teaching position in 2 years, all because parents complained that their children were distracted by her unusual appearance. The irony wasn't lost on her that in a neighborhood celebrating diversity, her mixed Korean and Irish heritage somehow made her too different to be accepted by either community. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory as she pushed through the heavy glass doors into the humid October afternoon. "You have your great-grandmother's eyes, little one. She was Irish, came over during the famine. Those eyes will bring you luck someday." Sage had been waiting 26 years for that luck to materialize, and so far all her distinctive blue eyes had brought her was unwanted attention and unemployment. The streets of Koreatown buzzed with late afternoon activity. Korean signage blazed in neon above her head, while the familiar sense of kimchi and grilled meat wafted from nearby restaurants. She'd grown up here after her Korean mother died when she was 8, raised by her Irish father who'd loved this neighborhood because it reminded him of his late wife. Now, walking these familiar streets with another termination letter in her purse, Sage felt more displaced than ever. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. Rent was due tomorrow, and her savings account held exactly $47. The teaching job had been her lifeline, and now that was gone too. She'd have to move back in with her father, endure more of his well-meaning but painful attempts to help her find where she belonged in a world that seemed determined to keep her on the outside. Lost in her spiraling thoughts, Sage barely noticed she'd wandered into an unfamiliar part of the neighborhood until the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the afternoon calm. Instinct sent her diving behind a parked Mercedes as chaos erupted around her. Shouts in Korean filled the air, followed by the screech of tires and more gunshots. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the cold metal of the car, clutching her cardboard box like a shield. This was not happening. Things like this didn't happen to elementary school teachers carrying boxes of confiscated glue sticks and motivational posters. Through the gap beneath the car, she could see expensive shoes running, blood spattering on concrete, the flash of weapons she'd only seen in movies. When silence finally fell, Sage remained frozen behind the Mercedes, afraid to breathe too loudly. Minutes passed like hours until the soft crunch of footsteps on broken glass made her pulse spike again. The footsteps stopped directly beside her hiding spot. A voice spoke in heavily accented English, low and controlled. "What do we have here?" Sage squeezed her eyes shut, as if that might make her invisible. The box in her arms felt ridiculous now. Children's artwork and teaching supplies a surreal contrast to whatever violence had just unfolded around her. "Stand up slowly." The voice held absolute authority, the kind of tone that expected instant obedience. Sage's legs trembled as she rose from behind the car, still clutching her pathetic cardboard shield. The man standing before her was unlike anyone she'd ever encountered. Tall and lean with sharp features that spoke of Korean heritage, he wore a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His dark hair was styled with precision, and his eyes, a deep brown that seemed to see everything, studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. But it was his stillness that unsettled her most. While her heart raced and her hands shook, he possessed the absolute calm of someone completely in control of a dangerous situation. Blood specked his white shirt, but his breathing was steady, his posture relaxed. This was a man accustomed to violence. "Your eyes," he said, and something shifted in his expression. Sage had heard variations of this observation her entire life, usually followed by questions about colored contacts or comments about how unusual she looked. She braced herself for the familiar discomfort. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "You saw what happened here." It wasn't a question. Sage nodded, not trusting her voice. Her grandmother's art lessons had been scattered across the pavement when she dove for cover. 26 years of her life reduced to soggy construction paper and broken crayons. "Then you're coming with me." He reached for her arm with surprising gentleness, his touch warm against her skin. For protection, not interrogation. Before Sage could process what was happening, he was guiding her toward a black SUV that had materialized at the end of the alley. Other men in expensive suits flanked the vehicle, their movements coordinated and efficient. This wasn't random street violence. This was organized, professional, and she'd stumbled directly into the middle of it. Wait, she finally found her voice as he opened the passenger door. I don't even know who you are. I was just walking home from work. I teach kindergarten. I'm not involved in whatever this is. He paused, his hand still on her elbow, and for the first time since this nightmare began, something almost like a smile touched his lips. Jinwoo Park. And you're involved now, whether you want to be or not. Those blue eyes of yours make you memorable. The people who did this will remember seeing you. The words sent ice through her veins. She glanced back at the crime scene, at the blood and broken glass that marked where someone's life had ended while she was hiding behind a car like a coward. Jinwoo followed her gaze, and his expression hardened again. They'll come looking for witnesses. The Kim family doesn't leave loose ends. His fingers tightened slightly on her arm, not painful but firm. I can protect you, but not if you're wandering around Koreatown carrying a box of art supplies like nothing happened. Sage looked down at the cardboard box still clutched in her arms. Her life's work, her carefully planned lessons and laminated posters, seemed absurd in this context. Everything she'd thought she knew about her world, about safety and normalcy, had shattered in the space of 10 minutes. What kind of protection? She asked, surprised by her own boldness. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a strange clarity. She had nothing left to lose anyway. No job, no savings, no prospects. Maybe being kidnapped by a well-dressed criminal was exactly the kind of change her life needed. Jinwoo studied her for a long moment, those dark eyes searching her face as if looking for something specific. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer but no less intense. My grandfather believes blue eyes bring luck to our family. Old superstition from the homeland. You'll be safer with us than anywhere else in this city, and we'll be stronger with you there. It should have sounded insane. A Korean crime family wanting to keep her as some kind of lucky charm based on her eye color. But standing in an alley where someone had just been murdered, holding the remnants of a teaching career that had never really taken off, Sage found herself nodding. She climbed into the SUV, still holding her box of kindergarten supplies, and watched through tinted windows as Jinwoo's men efficiently cleaned the crime scene. Whatever life she'd been trying to build in Koreatown was over. The question now was what would replace it. As the vehicle pulled away from the alley, Jinwoo spoke quietly into his phone in rapid Korean. Sage caught only fragments, but she heard her description mentioned several times, specifically the blue eyes that had marked her as different her entire life. For the first time, that difference might actually matter in a way that could change everything. The city blurred past the windows as they drove deeper into areas of Koreatown she'd never seen, where the signs were exclusively in Korean and the buildings looked more like fortresses than businesses. Jinwoo ended his call and turned to study her again, his gaze lingering on her eyes with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're not what I expected to find in that alley, he said finally. I wasn't expecting to find anything like this either, Sage replied, gesturing vaguely at the luxury interior of the SUV. This morning I was planning lessons about sharing and kindness. Now I'm apparently someone's lucky charm. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. Fate has strange timing. Our family has been struggling lately, losing ground to rivals, making poor decisions. Then you appear on the day we needed luck most. Sage shifted in her seat, the cardboard box crinkling against her chest. Do you actually believe that? That my eyes could bring luck to your organization? Jinwoo was quiet for several blocks, watching the familiar streets transform into territory she didn't recognize. Finally, he answered with a question of his own. Do you believe everything happens for a reason? I used to. Before today, I thought my biggest problem was getting fired from another job. Now I'm sitting in a crime boss's car talking about superstitions and family luck. If this is fate, it has a twisted sense of humor. Perhaps. Or perhaps fate finally decided to give you what you've been looking for. The words hung between them as the SUV turned into a private garage beneath a building that rose like a glass and steel monument into the evening sky. Whatever Jinwoo Park thought she'd been looking for, Sage was about to find out if he was right. The elevator climbed silently to the penthouse. each floor passing in a blur of numbers that seemed to mark Sage's ascent into an entirely different world. Jin Woo stood beside her, his presence both comforting and intimidating as they rose toward whatever awaited her at the top of this gleaming tower. She still clutched her ridiculous box of teaching supplies, the weight of it now feeling more like an anchor to her old life than the burden it had seemed hours ago. When the doors opened, Sage stepped into luxury beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles stretching to the Pacific, while traditional Korean artwork hung alongside modern pieces that probably cost more than she'd made in her entire teaching career. The space was massive yet somehow intimate, decorated with the kind of understated elegance that spoke of serious money and refined taste. But it was the elderly man rising from a leather chair near the windows who commanded her immediate attention. Even at what must have been 80 years old, he possessed the same controlled presence she'd recognized in Jin Woo. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit immaculate, and his dark eyes sharp with intelligence that seemed to miss nothing. Harabiaji, Jin Woo said, using what Sage assumed was a term of respect. This is Sage Chun, the witness I told you about. The old man's gaze found her face and stopped, his eyes widening slightly as they focused on her distinctive blue irises. He said something in rapid Korean to Jin Woo, his voice carrying excitement that needed no translation. Jin Woo responded in the same language, his tone measured and respectful. Sage shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, her cardboard box crinkling against her chest. She'd endured a lifetime of stares and comments about her unusual appearance. But this felt different. The old man was looking at her not with mere curiosity, but with something approaching reverence. "My dear child," he said finally, switching to English heavily accented but precise. "Your eyes. They are exactly as the old stories described. Blue as the mountain lakes of our homeland. Bright as the clearest winter sky." He approached slowly, his movements dignified despite his age, and Sage found herself standing straighter under his examination. This was clearly a man accustomed to being obeyed, someone whose approval mattered in ways she was only beginning to understand. Forgive an old man's excitement, he continued, gesturing toward the sitting area. "Please sit. We have much to discuss. I am Park Dae-young, Jin Woo's grandfather and head of this family. And you, I believe, are the answer to prayers I have been offering to my ancestors for months." Sage glanced at Jin Woo, who nodded encouragement before guiding her toward an overstuffed sofa that probably cost more than her father's car. She set her box carefully on the coffee table, hyper-aware of how out of place her kindergarten supplies looked among the crystal and jade decorating the elegant surface. "Mr. Park," she began, but the old man held up a weathered hand. "In our family, you will call me Harabiaji. It means grandfather, and from this moment, you are under our protection and care. Your grandmother, she was Irish, yes. I can see it in your features, the way you carry yourself. Your mother was Korean." Sage nodded, surprised by his accuracy. "My mother died when I was young. I grew up with my father in this neighborhood, but I've never felt like I truly belonged to either culture." Daejung's expression softened with understanding. This is the burden of those caught between worlds. But in our family's history, such people have always been blessed. There is an old legend from the mountains of Korea, passed down through generations of my ancestors. It speaks of blue-eyed foreigners who would come from across the sea to bring prosperity to struggling families. He settled into his chair with the careful movements of age, but his eyes remained bright with conviction. "My great-grandfather told me this story when I was barely older than a child. During the Japanese occupation, when our people suffered greatly, a blue-eyed missionary appeared in our village. She brought not only medicine and food, but luck that turned the tide for families who had lost everything. After she arrived, the rains came to end a terrible drought. Crops grew again. Children were born healthy after years of loss." Sage felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the penthouse. "This is just coincidence. I'm not some mystical figure from a legend. I teach kindergarten. I can barely keep my own life together." Jin Woo spoke from where he stood, near the windows. "Tell her about the timing, Harabiaji." The old man leaned forward, his gaze intense. "For the past 6 months, our family has faced challenges unlike any in my 50 years of leadership. The Kim organization has been moving against us, taking territory, corrupting our allies, killing our people. Yesterday, we lost 2 businesses and 3 good men to their ambition. This morning, I woke wondering if I had grown too old, if my leadership was failing the family that depends on me. Sage's mouth went dry as she began to understand where this was heading. The shooting she'd witnessed, the violence that had shattered her normal afternoon, had been part of a larger war. A war she was now somehow connected to. Then Jinwoo calls to tell me he has rescued a blue-eyed woman from the scene of Kim's latest attack. Not just any blue-eyed woman, but one who appeared at the exact moment when our family needed hope most. The ancestors work in ways we cannot always understand, but their signs are clear to those who know how to read them. The weight of their expectations settled on Sage's shoulders like a heavy coat. She thought about her morning, getting fired for being too different, walking home with nothing but a box of art supplies and $47 in savings. Now she was sitting in a penthouse being told she might be the salvation of a Korean crime family. "I don't know anything about your world," she said quietly. "I don't know how to bring luck to anyone. Most days, I can barely manage my own life." Dae-young smiled, the expression transforming his austere features with unexpected warmth. "This is exactly what makes you perfect for the role fate has given you. You come to us without ambition for power, without knowledge of our politics, without the corruption that touches everyone else in our business. Your innocence, your outsider's perspective, these are gifts more valuable than any weapon or strategy." Jinwoo moved closer, settling on the sofa beside her with easy grace. His presence was becoming familiar in ways that surprised her, offering comfort in this overwhelming situation. "You'll stay with me," he said, his tone matter-of-fact but gentle. "My apartment has everything you need, and it's the safest place in the building. Guards will be discreet but present at all times." "Stay with you," Sage repeated, processing the implications. "For how long?" "Until the Kim situation is resolved," Dae-young answered. "And after that, for as long as you choose to remain with our family. You are welcome here, child. More than welcome. You are needed." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. For the first time in her adult life, someone was telling her she was needed not despite her differences, but because of them. The blue eyes that had made her unemployable as a teacher were apparently exactly what this family had been praying for. That evening, Jinwoo's apartment proved to be a study in masculine elegance and traditional Korean aesthetics. Rich woods and clean lines dominated the space, while carefully chosen artwork and artifacts spoke of someone deeply connected to his cultural heritage. The kitchen was professional quality, all granite and stainless steel, and Sage found herself perched on a barstool watching him move around the space with practiced efficiency. "I should cook for myself," she protested as he began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "You've done enough by giving me a place to stay." Jinwoo glanced at her over his shoulder, something almost like amusement in his dark eyes. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" The question made her realize she couldn't remember. The stress of losing her job, the terror of witnessing violence, the surreal experience of being adopted by a crime family had completely erased her appetite. Now, watching Jinwoo's competent movements as he prepared what smelled like heaven, her stomach responded with a growl that made him smile. "Korean comfort food," he said, setting a bowl of rice and vegetables before her. "My mother's recipe for kimchi jjigae. And this is how you say thank you in Korean, 감사합니다." "감사합니다," Sage attempted, the syllables feeling foreign on her tongue. "Better. Try again, slower." She repeated the phrase until he nodded approval, surprised by how patient he was with her stumbling pronunciation. The stew was incredible, spicy and complex in ways that made her close her eyes with pleasure. She couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her, much less taught her pieces of their language while doing it. As they ate, Jinwoo explained more about the family structure, the legitimate businesses that formed the foundation of their organization, the ways they protected their community when law enforcement failed. He spoke with pride about his grandfather's leadership, the respect their family commanded throughout Koreatown. "Tomorrow," he said as they finished eating, "you'll meet the others. My cousins, my aunt, the people who help run our operations. They're curious about the blue-eyed woman their grandfather has proclaimed a blessing." Sage set down her chopsticks, meeting his gaze across the small table. "What if I'm not what you think I am? What if I'm just an unemployed teacher who was in the wrong place at the wrong time?" Jinwoo was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the soft light of the dining area. Then you'll still be safer here than anywhere else the Kim family might look for you. And we'll still be glad to have you. Something in his tone suggested he wasn't talking only about his grandfather's superstitions. The way he looked at her, the careful attention he'd shown to her comfort, the gentleness beneath his obvious strength, all pointed towards something more personal developing between them. Later, as Sage settled into the guest room he'd prepared for her, she could hear Jinwoo moving around the apartment, the quiet sounds of someone winding down from a day that had changed everything. Her cardboard box sat on the dresser, kindergarten supplies looking even more absurd in this context of marble and silk. She thought about her father, probably worried sick when she didn't come home. She thought about the principal who'd fired her this morning, and wondered what he'd think if he knew where she'd ended up. Most of all, she thought about the feeling that had settled in her chest during dinner, watching Jinwoo teach her Korean words and share his family's food. For the first time in her life, being different felt like it might be exactly what someone needed. Outside, the lights of Los Angeles stretched toward the horizon, but Sage felt safer than she had in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new questions about what role she was meant to play in this world she'd stumbled into. But tonight, protected by guards and walls, and the growing certainty that Jinwoo Park would keep her safe, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, finally, her blue eyes had brought her somewhere she might actually belong. The family gathering took place in a private dining room at one of their restaurants, an elegant space where traditional Korean decor blended seamlessly with modern luxury. Sage had spent the morning worrying about what to wear, finally settling on the one professional dress she'd packed in her overnight bag before Jinwoo assured her that his family would judge her by her character, not her clothing. Now, sitting at a table surrounded by people who shared Jinwoo's sharp intelligence and quiet confidence, she found herself unexpectedly at ease. The women of the family had embraced her immediately, particularly Jinwoo's Aunt Myung, who insisted on teaching her proper Korean table manners while sharing stories about her own struggles adapting to family expectations when she married into the Parks 30 years ago. "Your blue eyes, they remind me of the lake where I grew up," Myung said warmly, refilling Sage's teacup with practiced grace. "My grandmother always said such eyes could see beyond the surface of things, see truth that others missed." Jinwoo's younger cousin Hyunsik, barely out of college but already managing several legitimate businesses for the family, leaned forward with obvious enthusiasm. "The shipping deal with the Hong Kong investors," he said, "the one we've been struggling to close for 6 months. They agreed to terms this morning, just hours after Grandfather told them about our new family member with the blessed eyes." Sage felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't do anything. I was asleep when that meeting happened. But your presence was known," said Jinwoo's Uncle Dongmin, a serious man whose respect clearly wasn't given lightly. "In business, reputation and luck are as important as contracts and money. Word has already spread through the community that the Parks have been blessed by the ancestors. Our enemies fear what that might mean. Our allies want to strengthen their bonds with us." The weight of their expectations should have been overwhelming, but instead Sage found herself thinking about how different this felt from every other family gathering she'd ever attended. Her father's Irish relatives had always been kind but distant, treating her Korean features as something exotic to be politely acknowledged. Korean community events had been worse, whispered comments about her mixed heritage making her feel like an intruder pretending to belong. Here, her difference was being celebrated as a gift. These people looked at her unusual appearance and saw blessing, strength, hope for their family's future. For the first time in her life, standing out felt like exactly what someone needed. After lunch, Jinwoo took her to the family's import business, a sprawling warehouse where legitimate goods from Korea moved through customs alongside more questionable cargo that Sage suspected she wasn't meant to notice. She watched him interact with employees and business partners, noting how his commands were followed without question, how his presence changed the energy of every room he entered. "You're good at this," she said as they walked between towering shelves of merchandise. "Leading people, making them feel secure. It's like teaching, but with higher stakes." Jinwoo glanced at her, surprise flickering across his features. "Most people see only the danger in what we do. You see it as education." Sage stopped beside a display of Korean pottery, running her fingers along the smooth ceramic surface. When I was teaching, I had to learn how to read each child, understand what they needed to feel safe enough to learn. You do the same thing with adults. You create an environment where people can trust you to protect them. Something shifted in Jean Wu's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. You don't find it disturbing. What I am, what this family does. The honest question deserved an honest answer. Sage thought about the violence she'd witnessed, the blood on his shirt, the casual way his men had cleaned a crime scene. 2 days ago, she would have been horrified. Now, watching him move through his world with competence and care for those under his protection, she found her perspective changing in ways that should have worried her. I find it complicated, she said finally, but I don't find you disturbing. You saved my life. You've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. Your family has welcomed me when my own community never fully did. If that makes you dangerous people, then maybe dangerous isn't as simple as I thought. Jean Wu moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His hand came up to touch her cheek, fingers warm against her skin. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for someone who could see past the surface to what we really are. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent text. The moment shattered as his expression hardened, all business again as he read the message. We need to leave. Now. The drive back to the building was tense. Jean Wu making calls in rapid Korean, while Sage tried to piece together what was happening. She caught fragments about surveillance, about someone being followed, about increased security measures. When they reached the underground garage, additional guards were waiting, their faces grim with purpose. In the elevator, Jean Wu finally explained. Kim's people have been watching the restaurant, following family members. They know about you now, know you're living with us. Grandfather wants you moved to a more secure location until we can eliminate the threat. Sage's stomach clenched with fear that had nothing to do with her own safety. Your family is in danger because of me. Because I was in that alley. Jean Wu's hand found hers, his grip firm and reassuring. My family is in danger because Kim wants war. You're just another weapon he's trying to use against us. The difference is, you're a weapon that fights back. That evening, Sage found herself in a safe house across the city, a nondescript apartment that managed to be both comfortable and completely anonymous. Jean Wu had insisted on staying with her, stationing guards at every entrance while they waited for his grandfather's people to gather intelligence on Kim's next move. Tell me about your family, Sage said as they sat together on the small couch, sharing takeout from a Thai restaurant that delivered to safe houses without asking questions. About what it was like growing up in all this. Jean Wu was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he set down his chopsticks and leaned back against the cushions. I was groomed for this life from birth. Private schools that taught me languages and business, martial arts training that taught me to protect myself, cultural education that connected me to our heritage. By the time I was 20, I could negotiate deals in 4 languages, fight off attackers with my bare hands, and recite our family's history back 8 generations. But, Sage prompted, sensing there was more. But I was also expected to marry a nice Korean girl from a good family, produce sons to carry on the name, never question the path that had been chosen for me before I could walk. He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. 3 years ago, my grandfather arranged a marriage for me. Beautiful girl, perfect family connections, everything I should have wanted. Sage felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. What happened? I realized I was living someone else's life. The marriage would have been a business arrangement, 2 families strengthening their alliance through our children. There would have been respect, compatibility, maybe even affection eventually. But there wouldn't have been choice, and there wouldn't have been love. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Sage thought about her own history, the long string of relationships that had failed because she could never fully trust that someone wanted her for herself rather than as an exotic novelty. Jean Wu's situation was different, but somehow similar. The weight of family expectations making authentic connection nearly impossible. Is that why you've never married? She asked quietly. Because you're waiting for something real. Jean Wu's hand found hers on the couch, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that contrasted with his obvious strength. I was waiting for someone who could see me as more than just the heir to a criminal empire. Someone who could choose this life with full knowledge of what it means. Because they wanted to be with me, not because they wanted the power or the money or the status. His thumb traced across her knuckles, the simple touch sending warmth up her arm. Someone like an unemployed kindergarten teacher with blue eyes and no connection to our world. Someone who has nothing to gain from being here except safety and acceptance. Sage's breath caught as she realized what he was saying. This wasn't just about his grandfather's superstitions anymore. This was about them, about whatever was developing between two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. "Jinwoo," she started, but he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything. I know this is overwhelming. No, you didn't ask for any of this. But I need you to know that what I'm feeling has nothing to do with lucky charms or family expectations. It's about the way you see past the danger to find something worth protecting. It's about how you made my aunt laugh at dinner, how you helped Hyunsik feel proud of his accomplishments. It's about how you're the first person I've ever met who makes me want to be better than what this life usually demands." Before Sage could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the intimate moment. Jinwoo was on his feet instantly, gun appearing in his hand with practiced speed as he moved toward the windows. Outside, car engines roared to life and tires squealed against pavement. "Stay down," he commanded, but Sage was already moving, instincts she didn't know she possessed taking over as she grabbed her phone to call for backup. Through the broken window, she could see figures in dark clothing retreating toward waiting vehicles, their mission apparently complete now that they'd confirmed her location. Jinwoo was already on his radio, coordinating with security, arranging another move to another safe house. But as sirens wailed in the distance, and he checked her for injuries with hands that shook slightly despite his outward calm, Sage realized something had fundamentally changed between them. The threat against her had become personal for him in ways that went far beyond family obligation or ancestral superstition. Later, in their third secure location in as many days, as Jinwoo's people swept the area for surveillance and established new perimeter security, Sage found herself thinking about the intensity in his eyes when he'd checked her for cuts from the broken glass. About the way he'd held her just a moment too long after confirming she was unhurt. She was falling for him. Despite the danger, despite the impossibility of their situation, despite every rational reason she should be focused on survival rather than romance, she was falling for Jinwoo Park. And based on everything that had happened tonight, he was falling for her too. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, as she drifted off to sleep in yet another anonymous safe house with the sound of his voice coordinating her protection just outside her door, Sage felt something that might actually be the luck his grandfather kept talking about. Not the supernatural kind, but the simple human fortune of finding someone worth fighting for in the middle of a war she'd never asked to join. The peace meeting was scheduled for neutral ground, a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles where neither family held territorial advantage. Sage watched from the security monitors as Jinwoo and his grandfather arrived with their delegation, noting the tension in every line of Jinwoo's body despite his outwardly calm demeanor. 3 weeks of escalating attacks had taken their toll on both organizations, and this meeting represented their last chance to avoid all-out war. She'd been relegated to the command center, surrounded by guards and technology, but her presence was felt even in absentia. Word had spread through the Korean criminal underworld about the Park family's blue-eyed blessing, and the psychological impact had been immediate. Kim's men had started wearing mirrors and carrying charms to ward off her supposed curse, their superstitious fear giving the Parks a tactical advantage that couldn't be measured in weapons or numbers. The meeting lasted exactly 18 minutes before gunfire erupted through the speakers. Sage watched in horror as the carefully arranged negotiation dissolved into chaos, muzzle flashes illuminating the warehouse as both sides took cover behind shipping containers. Jinwoo's voice crackled through the radio, calm and professional even as bullets whined around him. Negotiation failed. Moving to extraction point 2. Sage, stay put until we reach secure location. But Sage had already seen what the monitors were showing her. Kim's forces had surrounded the building, cutting off the planned escape routes. The Parks were walking into a trap, and Jinwoo was about to lead his family into an ambush that would end with all of them dead. She grabbed the radio despite the protests of her guards. "Jinwoo, they're waiting for you at extraction 2. Take the service tunnels instead. Head east toward the river." "How do you know that?" His voice was strained with the effort of coordinating a retreat under fire. Because I'm watching them position their people right now. Trust me. The silence stretched for heartbeats that felt like hours before Jin Woo's voice returned, tight, with decision. Copy that, Blue Eyes. Moving to alternate route. 20 minutes later, the park delegation arrived at their safe house bloodied but alive, having escaped through maintenance tunnels that Kim's forces hadn't thought to cover. As Jin Woo strode into the command center, his eyes found Sage immediately, relief and something deeper passing between them before he turned to address his grandfather. Ward is, Dae-young said simply, dabbing at a cut on his cheek. Kim has made his choice. Now we make ours. The next 72 hours blurred together in a haze of tactical planning and constant movement. Safe houses were activated across the city as the park organization prepared for siege warfare. Sage found herself at the center of strategic discussions, her outsider's perspective helping to identify weaknesses in Kim's positioning that longtime soldiers had missed. But it was the nights that changed everything between her and Jin Woo. Isolated in a fortified apartment while guards maintained perimeter security, they finally had space to acknowledge what had been building between them since that first day in the alley. The first night, exhaustion and adrenaline created an intimacy that felt both inevitable and fragile. Jin Woo had insisted on teaching her to handle a pistol, his hands guiding hers as she learned proper stance and breathing techniques. The closeness, the trust required to put a weapon in her hands, the way he watched her face as she gradually gained confidence with something that could save her life, all combined to create a tension that had nothing to do with fear of their enemies. "You're a natural," he said as she hit the center of the target for the third consecutive time. "Most people fight the recoil, but you're working with it." "Good teacher," she replied, turning to find him closer than she'd expected. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body after hours of training. The weapon fell forgotten as Jin Woo's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with reverent gentleness. "I keep thinking about what Kim's bullets could have done to you. How close we came to losing this before it even started." Sage leaned into his touch, her own hands coming up to rest against his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palms. "What is this, Jin Woo? What are we doing here?" "We're falling in love in the middle of a war," he said simply. "It's terrible timing and completely impractical, and probably the most dangerous thing either of us could do right now. But we're doing it anyway," she whispered, because the truth was undeniable. Whatever was happening between them had moved far beyond gratitude or convenience, or even the intense attraction she'd felt from the beginning. This was deeper, more consuming, the kind of connection she'd given up believing she'd ever find. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate tenderness of someone who understood how precious and precarious their situation was. Sage responded with equal intensity, pouring weeks of suppressed emotion into the contact as her arms wound around his neck and his hands tangled in her hair. They moved together toward the bedroom with the urgent inevitability of people who had been dancing around this moment since their first meeting. But even as desire clouded rational thought, Jin Woo maintained the careful control that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips as they reached the edge of the bed, his hands stilling on the buttons of her shirt. "Because once we cross this line, there's no going back." "Not for me. I've been sure since you taught me to say thank you in Korean," Sage admitted, her own fingers working at his collar. "Since you cooked for me and made me feel welcome in your family. Since you risked everything to keep me safe when you barely knew my name." What followed was an exploration of trust and vulnerability that went far deeper than physical intimacy. Jin Woo loved her with the same meticulous attention he brought to everything else, learning what made her gasp and tremble, responding to every sound and movement until she forgot everything except his name and the incredible gentleness of his hands and mouth. When they finally collapsed together, sweat-slicked and breathing hard, Sage felt fundamentally changed. Not just by the physical connection, though that had been more intense than anything she'd ever experienced, but by the emotional intimacy they'd created together. Jin Woo held her against his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin while their heartbeats gradually slowed to match each other's rhythm. "I love you," he said into the darkness, the words simple and certain. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you see possibilities where others see only problems. I love that you chose to stay in my world when you could have disappeared back into yours. Sage turned in his arms to meet his gaze, seeing her own emotions reflected in his dark eyes. I love you too. I love how you protect the people you care about. I love your patience when you're teaching me Korean and your focus when you're planning strategy. I love that you make me feel like being different is exactly what you need. The second night brought fresh challenges as Kim's forces launched coordinated attacks against Park businesses throughout the city. Sage monitored communications while Jin-Woo coordinated defensive measures, their partnership now extending into every aspect of the crisis. She found herself anticipating his needs, reading his expressions across crowded rooms, providing tactical support that helped save lives and resources. But it was during the quiet moments between battles that she learned the most about the man she'd fallen in love with. Jin-Woo shared stories about growing up under his grandfather's expectations, about the loneliness of being groomed for leadership from childhood, about the weight of carrying responsibility for so many families who depended on Park protection. I used to think love was a luxury I couldn't afford, he told her as they planned response strategies over takeout containers and tactical maps. That caring about someone that much would make me weak, give enemies something to use against me. And now, she prompted, looking up from the surveillance reports she was reviewing. Now I realize it makes me stronger. Having something to protect beyond duty or tradition. Having someone who chose to be here, who sees what we're fighting for and decides it's worth the risk. Their third night together was interrupted by news that shattered everything they thought they knew about the war. Hyun-sik burst into their safe house pale and shaking, barely coherent as he delivered information that turned their understanding of recent events upside down. Uncle Dongmin has been feeding information to Kim, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush of Korean and English. I found the encrypted communications, saw the payment transfers. He's been selling our movements for months. The betrayal hit Jin-Woo like a physical blow. Sage watched his face cycle through disbelief, rage, and cold calculation as he processed the implications. Dongmin had been Daejung's most trusted advisor, Jin-Woo's mentor in business strategy. His betrayal explained how Kim had stayed one step ahead despite the park's superior resources and intelligence network. Where is he now? Jin-Woo's voice was deadly quiet. With Harabiaji, planning tomorrow's operation against Kim's headquarters. He doesn't know I found the evidence. Sage felt pieces click into place with horrible clarity. Tomorrow's operation was supposed to be their decisive strike, using intelligence that Dongmin had helped provide. If he was working for Kim, the entire plan was a trap designed to eliminate the park leadership in one coordinated ambush. You have to warn your grandfather, she said, already reaching for communications equipment. Call it off, change the plan, do something. But Jin-Woo was shaking his head, his expression grim with certainty. If we change plans now, Dongmin will know we're onto him. He'll disappear, and we'll never get another chance to take him down. We go forward with the operation, but we set our own trap. The next 18 hours required the kind of precise coordination that had made the parks dominant in their territory for decades. Working with his most trusted lieutenants, Jin-Woo crafted a plan within a plan, using Dongmin's betrayal to feed false information to Kim while setting up their real strike for maximum advantage. Sage found herself at the heart of the operation, her tactical insights helping to position assets and coordinate timing. But as she watched Jin-Woo prepare to walk into what could easily become a death trap, fear threatened to overwhelm the professional focus she'd developed. Come back to me, she said as he checked his weapon and body armor one final time. Whatever happens in there, promise me you'll come back. Jin-Woo pulled her against him, his kiss fierce with promise and desperation. I'll come back. We have too much to build together for me to get killed by a traitor and a coward. The operation went sideways within minutes. Despite their precautions, Kim had prepared for the possibility that his intelligence might be compromised. The warehouse became a killing field as both sides discovered they were walking into mutual ambushes, confusion and crossfire creating chaos that no amount of planning could have anticipated. From the command post, Sage watched Jin-Woo's team advance through smoke and gunfire, her heart stopping every time his signal went dark for more than a few seconds. When Dongmin's betrayal became active rather than passive, When he turned his gun on Jin-woo during the middle of the firefight, Sage made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Abandoning the relative safety of the command post despite orders to stay put, she grabbed a weapon and additional ammunition, using service corridors and maintenance access to reach the warehouse floor. Her target practice with Jin-woo had prepared her for handling the weapon, but nothing could have prepared her for the sensory assault of actual combat. She found Jin-woo pinned down by crossfire, blood spreading across his shoulder where Dongmin's bullet had found its mark. The traitor was advancing for a finishing shot, confident that Kim's forces would cover his escape once the park leadership was eliminated. Sage's first shot took Dongmin in the leg, sending him sprawling behind cover. Her second shot, as he tried to return fire, caught him center mass and ended his betrayal permanently. By the time Jin-woo realized she was there, the immediate threat was neutralized and backup was arriving to secure the area. The aftermath became a blur of medical attention and damage assessment. Jin-woo's wound was serious but not life-threatening, the bullet having missed major arteries and organs. As paramedics worked to stabilize him for transport, his grandfather appeared at Sage's side, his expression mixing gratitude and something approaching awe. "You saved my grandson's life," Dae-young said simply. "You put yourself in danger to protect our family. This is not luck or superstition. This is love and courage and loyalty that comes from the heart, not the stars." Later, in the hospital room where Jin-woo was recovering, Sage sat beside his bed holding his uninjured hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. The painkillers made him talkative when awake, and he used the opportunity to tell her everything he'd been thinking during the operation. "When I saw you in that warehouse," he said, his voice thick with medication and emotion, "I realized you weren't just someone I wanted to protect anymore. You were my partner, my equal, someone who would fight beside me instead of waiting to be rescued. That's when I knew we were going to build something extraordinary together." The next morning brought news that Kim's organization had surrendered following their leader's death in the warehouse battle. The war was over, territory secured, family protected. But for Sage, the real victory was watching Jin-woo's eyes open clearly and focus on her face with complete recognition and love. That afternoon, Dae-young performed a ceremony that formally adopted Sage into the Park family, giving her the Korean name Park Eun-kyung, which meant gracious blessing. As she knelt before the family altar and repeated words in Korean she was only beginning to understand, Sage felt the final pieces of her identity clicking into place. She was no longer the blue-eyed outsider who didn't belong anywhere. She was Park Eun-kyung, blessed daughter of a family that had claimed her not despite her differences, but because of them. She was Jin-woo's partner in every sense that mattered, a woman who had proven herself capable of fighting for the people she loved. Most importantly, she was home. The war room had been transformed into a strategic command center, with detailed maps of Kim territory covering every surface and surveillance feeds providing real-time intelligence on enemy positions. 3 weeks after Jin-woo's recovery from the warehouse shooting, the Park family was ready to end the conflict permanently. What had started as a territorial dispute had evolved into something far more personal, and Kim's remaining forces had consolidated around their leader's desperate final stand. Sage studied the tactical displays with the same attention to detail she'd once given to lesson plans, her outsider's perspective having proven invaluable in identifying patterns that lifetime soldiers missed. The blue-eyed blessing that had started as his grandfather's superstition had become genuine strategic advantage, but not for mystical reasons. Her analytical mind, unburdened by decades of traditional thinking, consistently found solutions that surprised everyone. The psychological impact of her presence had exceeded even Dae-jung's expectations. Kim's remaining soldiers wore mirrors sewn into their clothing and carried protective charms, their superstitious terror making them hesitant and unpredictable in combat. More than one engagement had been won simply because enemy forces retreated rather than face the supposed curse of the blue-eyed demon. Jin-woo moved around the planning table with fluid grace despite his healing shoulder, coordinating final preparations with the quiet authority that had first attracted her attention. Watching him work, Sage marveled at how completely her life had transformed. 6 months ago, she'd been an unemployed teacher carrying art supplies through Koreatown. Now she was an integral part of planning the decisive battle that would determine the future of organized crime in Los Angeles. "The operation is sound," she said, tracing convoy routes on the digital map, "but you're still thinking defensively. Kim expects us to lay siege to his compound and try to break through his fortifications. What if we give him exactly what he wants?" Jin-Woo paused in his briefing of the assault teams, his attention focusing on her with the intensity she'd learned meant he was processing something important. "Explain." Sage pulled up surveillance footage of Kim's compound, highlighting the reinforced positions and defensive measures that made direct assault costly and time-consuming. "He's built his defenses to repel an attack from the outside. But look at his positioning inside the compound. Everything is designed to keep us out. Nothing is designed to keep him in." Understanding dawned in Jin-Woo's expression as he followed her logic. "You want to get inside before the assault begins." "I want him to invite me inside," Sage corrected. "Kim is terrified of what my presence represents. His men are demoralized and looking for any excuse to surrender. What happens if the blue-eyed curse walks through his front door and asks to speak with him directly?" The room fell silent as the tactical implications became clear. It was audacious, dangerous, and completely unexpected. It was also exactly the kind of psychological warfare that had given the Parks every advantage since Sage's arrival. "Absolutely not," Jin-Woo said immediately. "I won't let you walk into his compound alone. It's suicide." Sage met his gaze steadily, seeing the fear and love and protective instinct warring in his dark eyes. She understood his concerns, shared them herself, but she also understood something he couldn't see from inside the situation. "I won't be alone," she said quietly. "I'll have you and your entire organization behind me. And I'll have something Kim doesn't understand and can't fight against. I'll have the truth." The next 6 hours were spent refining a plan that relied more on psychology than firepower, though Jin-Woo insisted on positioning assault teams within striking distance in case negotiation failed. Sage would approach Kim's compound under a flag of truce, requesting a face-to-face meeting to discuss terms for ending the war. Her presence would create maximum psychological impact while demonstrating the Park's confidence in their position. As dawn broke over the city, Sage found herself in the back of an armored vehicle approaching territory that had been enemy ground for months. She wore traditional Korean formal dress that Mi-young had helped her choose, the elegant hanbok lending her an air of authority that complemented her unusual appearance. Jin-Woo sat beside her, his tension evident despite his outward calm. "Remember," he said as they neared the compound gates, "you hold all the cards in this negotiation. Kim is desperate, his organization is crumbling, and his men are terrified of you. Don't give him anything he doesn't already know he's lost." Sage squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence and the weight of the family's trust in her judgment. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined herself in this position. Now, walking toward a meeting that would determine the fate of both organizations, she felt the kind of certainty that came from finally understanding her purpose. The compound's gates opened without resistance, Kim's guard stepping aside as she approached with a small escort. Word of her arrival spread through the defenders like wildfire, and Sage could see the psychological impact immediately. Men who should have been manning defensive positions instead gathered to catch glimpses of the woman whose blue eyes had become legend throughout their community. Kim himself waited in his office, a man in his 50s whose expensive suit couldn't disguise the desperation in his eyes. He'd lost too many men, too much territory, too much face to continue fighting a war he no longer believed he could win. But it was the fear in his expression when he looked directly at her that told Sage everything she needed to know about how this meeting would end. "Park Eun-kyung," he said, using her Korean name with grudging respect. "I wondered when you would come to claim your victory personally." "Mr. Kim," Sage replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with calm dignity. "I've come to offer you a choice. You can surrender your operations to my family and accept safe passage out of California for yourself and your immediate relatives. Or you can continue this war until there's nothing left of either organization to fight over." Kim studied her for a long moment, his gaze lingering on her distinctive eyes before moving to the traditional dress that marked her acceptance into Korean culture. "You're not what I expected when this started. When my informants first reported that the Parks had acquired a blue-eyed foreign woman, I assumed it was some kind of elaborate deception. And now, Sage asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Now I think fate decided the Parks deserve to win this war. You've brought them tactical advantages, psychological advantages, and something else I can't quantify. You've made them stronger as a family. Kim leaned back in his chair, the fight going out of him visibly. My men call you the blue-eyed demon, but that's not what you are. You're their angel, their blessing made manifest. Within 2 hours, terms had been negotiated and agreements signed that transferred Kim's remaining territory and operations to Park Control. His organization would be absorbed into theirs, with Kim himself accepting exile to South Korea, where he had distant family connections. The war was over, decided not by bloodshed but by the psychological impact of a woman whose very presence had convinced their enemies that fighting was futile. The drive back to Park territory was celebratory, filled with reports from lieutenants confirming that Kim's forces were laying down weapons and accepting new leadership. Territory that had been contested for months was now secure. Businesses could resume normal operations, and families could stop living in fear of retaliation. But for Sage, the real victory was watching Jinwoo coordinate the peaceful transition of power, his leadership skills ensuring that former enemies became productive members of their organization rather than bitter resistors. The man she'd fallen in love with was not just a capable warrior, but a visionary leader who understood that true strength came from building rather than destroying. That evening, the family gathered for a celebration that quickly became something more significant. Dae-young had arranged for a traditional Korean engagement ceremony, complete with formal robes and ancient rituals that connected them to centuries of cultural heritage. Sage found herself kneeling on silk cushions while Jinwoo's female relatives helped her into ceremonial dress that had been worn by Park family brides for generations. When Jinwoo appeared in matching formal wear, the transformation was breathtaking. This wasn't the dangerous man who'd rescued her from an alley or the tactical commander who'd led them through war. This was a Korean nobleman claiming his bride according to traditions that predated any of the modern conflicts they'd survived. Park Eun-kyung, he said, using her formal name as he knelt across from her before the family altar. 6 months ago, you walked into our world as a stranger seeking safety. Tonight, I ask you to choose to stay as my wife, my partner, my equal in all things. The engagement ring was a stunning blend of traditional Korean design and modern craftsmanship, featuring blue sapphires that echoed her distinctive eyes, surrounded by diamonds and settings that suggested both cultures she'd learned to call home. But it was Jinwoo's words that truly captured the magnitude of what he was offering. You came to us carrying children's artwork and wearing clothes that cost less than my coffee, he continued, his voice carrying emotions that went far beyond formal ceremony. You had nothing we thought we needed and everything we didn't know we were missing. You've made our family stronger, our organization more successful, our future brighter than anything I dared hope for. Sage looked around the room at faces that had become family, people who had embraced her not despite her differences, but because of them. Mi-young wiping tears from her eyes, Hyun-sik grinning with obvious delight, Dae-young nodding approval as ancient words were spoken in languages she was still learning. Yes, she said simply, the word carrying 6 months of growth and transformation and love that had survived everything their world could throw against it. Yes, I choose this life, this family, this future we'll build together. The formal ceremony was followed by hours of celebration that blended Korean traditions with American customs, creating something uniquely theirs. Relatives shared stories about previous family weddings while planning began for their own ceremony, which would honor both cultures that had shaped their relationship. Later, alone in their apartment high above the city they'd helped secure, Sage and Jinwoo stood at the windows watching Los Angeles spread toward the horizon. The engagement ring caught light from the skyline, its blue stones echoing the eyes that had brought them together. No regrets, Jinwoo asked, his arms wrapping around her from behind as she leaned against his chest. Sage thought about everything that had led to this moment. The job loss that had left her walking through Koreatown with a box of art supplies. The violence that had shattered her normal world. The family that had claimed her as their blessing. The man who had seen past her differences to the person she could become. None at all, she said, turning in his arms to meet his gaze. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The wedding planning could wait until morning. Tonight was for celebrating the end of a war, and the beginning of a marriage that would unite not just two people, but two cultures, two worlds, two futures that had found their way to each other against impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. The expanded territory would need careful management, former enemies would need integration into their organization, and Sage would continue learning to balance her American directness with Korean harmony. But tonight, watching the city lights twinkle like stars and feeling Jinwoo's steady heartbeat against her back, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The blue-eyed blessing had found her home at last. 6 months later, the traditional Korean wedding ceremony took place in the same hotel ballroom where Dae-young had first explained the legend of blue-eyed blessings to his family. Sage moved through the elaborate rituals with grace that would have been impossible during her early weeks with the Parks, her fluent Korean allowing her to participate fully in traditions that connected her to centuries of cultural heritage. The formal hanbok she wore had been crafted by master seamstresses in Seoul, its deep blue silk chosen to complement her distinctive eyes, while honoring the colors that held significance in Korean wedding traditions. Jinwoo stood beside her in matching ceremonial robes, his pride evident as they knelt before the family altar and spoke vows that bound them not just to each other, but to the continuation of family legacy. Watching from the front row, Dae-young dabbed at his eyes with a silk handkerchief while his great-grandchildren played quietly nearby. 2-year-old twins with unmistakably blue eyes and their father's dark hair represented the next generation of Parks, living proof that Sage's blessing extended far beyond business success or territorial expansion. The children spoke a mixture of Korean, English, and their own invented language, switching between cultures as naturally as their mother had learned to do. The American reception that followed blended seamlessly with Korean traditions, creating something uniquely theirs that reflected both backgrounds without diminishing either. Sage's father, finally able to see his daughter settled and happy, shared stories about her childhood with Jinwoo's relatives, while Mi-young taught him basic Korean phrases that made the children giggle with delight. As the evening progressed, Sage found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The elementary school where she'd been fired for being too different had closed the previous month, its enrollment declining as parents chose more diverse educational environments. She'd heard the news without satisfaction, understanding now that their narrow-mindedness had been a gift that pushed her toward her true destiny. The park organization had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, with international operations spanning 3 continents and legitimate businesses that provided cover for activities that remained necessarily discreet. Sage managed the overseas development personally, her multilingual skills and cultural flexibility making her invaluable in negotiations with partners who respected the family's reputation for honor and reliability. More importantly, she'd become the bridge between traditional Korean values and modern American innovation, helping the family adapt to changing times without losing the principles that defined their identity. The younger generation looked to her for guidance on navigating dual cultures, while the older members appreciated her respect for traditions she'd learned as an adult rather than inherited from birth. During the reception, a young woman approached nervously, her own mixed heritage evident in features that suggested both Korean and Mexican ancestry. She'd recently married one of Jinwoo's cousins and was struggling with the same sense of displacement that had once defined Sage's existence. "Mrs. Park," the young woman said hesitantly, using the formal title that still felt strange to Sage's ears. "I wanted to thank you for the Korean language classes. Learning to communicate with my husband's grandmother has made such a difference in how the family sees me." Sage smiled, remembering her own early attempts at pronunciation and grammar that had made Jinwoo laugh with gentle affection. "Keep practicing, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. The effort matters more than perfection, and every word you learn is another way to show respect for the culture you're joining." The program she'd established for newcomers to the family had grown beyond her original vision, providing language instruction, cultural education, and emotional support for spouses who found themselves navigating unfamiliar traditions. It was her way of ensuring that future generations wouldn't experience the isolation she'd felt before finding her place in this world. Later in the evening, as the formal festivities wound down and smaller groups gathered for intimate conversation, Sage found herself standing with Dae-young in a quiet corner of the reception hall. His health had declined noticeably over the past months, but his mind remained sharp, and his satisfaction with the family's success was evident in every gesture. "Do you remember what I told you that first day?" he asked, his voice softer than it had once been, but still carrying absolute authority. "About blue-eyed foreigners bringing prosperity to struggling families." Sage nodded, thinking about how impossible it had seemed that her appearance could matter to anyone in positive ways. "I thought you were humoring an old man's superstitions." Dae-young chuckled, the sound warm with affection and amusement. "Perhaps I was. But sometimes superstitions become truth because believing in them helps us see possibilities we might otherwise miss. Your eyes didn't bring us luck through magic. They brought us luck because they belonged to someone who could see our family's potential when we had stopped seeing it ourselves." He gestured toward the reception hall, where 3 generations of Parks celebrated together. Former enemies who had become loyal family members mingling with relatives who had welcomed Sage as one of their own. The organization was stronger than it had ever been, its influence extending into legitimate business ventures that provided prosperity without the constant threat of violence that had once defined their existence. "You gave us more than tactical advantages or psychological warfare," Dae-young continued. "You gave us hope that our traditions could evolve without being lost, that our family could grow without losing its identity. You showed Jinwoo that love and leadership weren't mutually exclusive, and you've shown all of us that belonging isn't about where you come from, but about what you choose to build." The next morning, Sage woke in their renovated penthouse to the sound of Jinwoo making breakfast while their children played in the living room. The view from their windows encompassed territory that stretched from downtown Los Angeles to the Pacific, land and businesses that provided prosperity for hundreds of families who looked to the parks for protection and opportunity. But it was the domestic scene around their breakfast table that truly captured the magnitude of their success. Jinwoo helped their daughter with her Korean pronunciation, while their son attempted to eat pancakes with chopsticks, both children switching between languages and cultures with the unconscious ease that came from being raised in a household that celebrated both. "Appa," their daughter asked in Korean, using the formal term for father, "why do people say Yama has special eyes?" Jinwoo glanced at Sage, sharing the smile that had become their private communication about how to handle questions that touched on family legend and personal history. "Your mother's eyes are special because they helped her see that our family needed someone exactly like her. And they helped us recognize that different doesn't mean wrong, it just means unique." The explanation satisfied their daughter's curiosity while avoiding details about violence and warfare that would be shared when they were old enough to understand the full complexity of their heritage. For now, it was enough that they knew their parents had found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build something extraordinary together. That afternoon, Sage taught her weekly language class to newest family members, watching another generation of newcomers struggle with pronunciation and cultural nuances that had once seemed insurmountable to her as well. Among them was a young Korean woman who had married into an Irish-American family and was learning English, creating a perfect circle that connected Sage's own heritage to her current role as cultural bridge. As evening fell and the family gathered for their weekly dinner at Dae-jung's apartment, Sage found herself studying the faces around the table with deep satisfaction. Hyun-sik, now managing the family's legitimate business empire with remarkable success. Mi-young, training the next generation of family wives in traditions that stretched back centuries. Jinwoo, confident in his role as heir and leader, no longer burdened by expectations that felt impossible to fulfill. Most importantly, there were the children, growing up bilingual and bicultural, comfortable in both worlds without feeling torn between them. They would face challenges that Sage and Jinwoo couldn't yet imagine, but they would face them with advantages that came from being raised in a family that celebrated diversity rather than merely tolerating it. After dinner, as the extended family dispersed to their own homes and responsibilities, Sage and Jinwoo walked through the neighborhood where their story had begun. The alley where she'd hidden behind a Mercedes was now a small park where Korean and Latino children played together while their parents conducted business in 3 languages. The elementary school that had fired her had been replaced by a community center that offered services regardless of immigration status or family background. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in that alley that day? Jinwoo asked as they passed the spot where everything had changed. Sage considered the question seriously, thinking about the chain of events that had led from unemployment and isolation to the life they'd built together. I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not that day, maybe not in those circumstances, but somehow. Some connections are too strong to be left to chance. They paused at the entrance to their building, looking up at windows that glowed with warm light from families settling in for the evening. Their own children were upstairs with their babysitter, probably arguing about bedtime stories in the mixture of Korean and English that had become the soundtrack of their household. Jinwoo pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her waist as they shared the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed words to communicate deep understanding. The blue eyes that had marked her as different throughout her childhood now reflected the lights of a city where she belonged completely, where her appearance was associated with strength and wisdom rather than displacement and confusion. No regrets, he asked, echoing the question he'd posed on their engagement night. None at all, Sage replied, turning in his arms to meet his gaze. This is exactly the life I was meant to live. As they rode the elevator to their penthouse, Sage caught her reflection in the mirrored walls and saw not the outsider who had once walked these streets carrying a box of teaching supplies, but Park Eun-kyung, beloved daughter of a family that had claimed her completely. The blue eyes that had once made her unemployable now looked back at her with confidence and belonging that no amount of mockery could ever diminish. Their children were asleep when they reached home, dark heads on pillows in rooms decorated with artwork that celebrated both Korean and Irish heritage. Sage tucked blankets around their small forms while Jinwoo turned off lights and secured their apartment for the night. Domestic rituals that felt no less significant than the ceremonies and traditions that had marked their formal union. Later, lying in bed with her head on Jinwoo's chest and his fingers tracing gentle patterns through her hair, Sage thought about the young woman at their wedding reception who was struggling to find her place in an unfamiliar culture. Tomorrow, she would offer additional language lessons and cultural guidance, helping another outsider discover that being different could become the foundation for something extraordinary rather than a barrier to acceptance. The city spread beyond their windows like a constellation of possibilities, each light representing families and dreams and futures that intersected in ways both planned and unexpected. Sage Chun had walked into this world as a stranger seeking safety and emerged as Park Eun-kyung, a woman whose blue eyes had become symbols of hope rather than markers of displacement. Her greatest strength had always been the thing that made her different. It had just taken finding the right family, the right love, the right purpose to understand that difference was a gift rather than a curse. And now, surrounded by the life they'd built together and the legacy they were creating for future generations, she finally understood what her grandmother had meant all those years ago. The blue eyes had brought her luck after all, not the mystical kind that legends promised, but the simple human fortune of finding where she belonged and building something beautiful there. Do you think about how this story might inspire others who feel like outsiders in their own communities? What challenges have you overcome by embracing what makes you different rather than trying to hide it?